Shalom and welcome to another episode of Community Relations Corner, where we discuss the issues of concern to New York's Jewish community and our friends and partners all around the New York metropolitan area. I'm Michael Miller, the Executive Vice President and CEO of the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York, JCRC-NY, and we are very honored to have as our guest today our very good friend, the Acting Consul General of the State of Israel in New York, Israel Nitzan. And taking time out of your workday currently was difficult enough during COVID, but currently with the situation in Israel, we're truly grateful that you've spared a little bit of time for us. It'll be an abbreviated session, but nonetheless, at least we have the privilege of having a conversation with you. So first of all, Bruchim Habayim, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael.
And let's start first by, I'm sure, what our viewers are interested in, which is an update on the matzav, on the situation in Israel, and the escalating violence. Can you please give us the latest?
So the latest is let's start with the general situation. Israel is under attack by Hamas, a terrorist organization from Gaza. Launched an attack against Israeli civilian communities since on Monday. Since then, in the last 3 days, we've had already 2,000 rockets were fired at Israeli communities, all the way from the Gaza Strip. It started actually with a barrage of 7 rockets launched at Jerusalem, leading to another attack against the Dan area, which is the area of the suburbs of Tel Aviv, and even northern than that. So all in all, we've had already 2,000 rockets launched by these terrorists at Israeli civilian communities. I have to say but one interesting piece of information that I can share is that about 30% of the rockets did not actually cross the border into Israel. So 30% out of the 2,000 fell short in the Gaza Strip, basically putting Palestinian lives in danger. We believe that there are Palestinian casualties due to these failed shootings. And of course, Hamas blames Israel for these explosions and these casualties. One more comment that I would like to say, that when you when you hear the numbers coming out of Gaza, we need to remember it's coming from the Ministry of Health in the Gaza Strip. It is controlled by Hamas, and Hamas has the interest to inflate the numbers. As I said, some of the casualties were actually killed or injured due to failed shooting of rockets. The IDF Israel launched an operation. It's called Guardians of the Walls on Monday, following the shooting at Jerusalem, in which we target the IDF is targeting military infrastructure and facilities of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. We have eliminated several senior commanders of Hamas, including some people who are involved in shooting of rockets, as well as some of the anti-tank missiles, and I will refer to it in a second, also to this problem, units. Also, we're also targeting not only Hamas is shooting rockets, also the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and they are also the target. Again, their military units and infrastructure and facilities are our target. When I'm talking about the military infrastructure, I'm talking about headquarters, I'm talking about attack tunnels. There were 2 attack tunnels that were targeted, that were struck by Israel, attack tunnels dug by Hamas underneath the border in order to allow their commando units penetrate into Israel and attack our communities next to the Gaza border. But also the rocket manufacturing facilities. So everything now is being targeted. This is a very precise and targeted campaign against the terrorists, against their military facilities. We have no intention, and we do whatever we can in order to avoid any harm to civilians. I would like to add maybe two more things to here. Today, at least in the last 3 days, we've had already 6 Israeli civilians who were killed by these Hamas rocket attacks. The last one was a 5-year-old child last night. We have one Indian national who was killed from a direct hit of a Hamas rocket, and one IDF officer who have been killed due to an anti-tank missile that was shot from the Gaza Strip. But I want to say one thing. The anti-tank missile was, as far as we know, was provided by Iran. This is a Cornet missile. It was provided by Iran. Iran is still involved in smuggling and providing the information and the resources to. I'm sorry, not the information, the weapons and the resources to Hamas. We have 1 million Israelis today under the threat of rockets in Hamas or by Hamas. One more thing that I need to say is about Iron Dome, and this is the importance of the Iron Dome anti-missile system. It has a very high percentage, of interceptions. Let's say most of the rockets do not eventually hit our civilian communities because some of them, let's say a very significant percentage of them is intercepted by the Iron Dome. The Iron Dome system does not only save lives. It saves lives of Israeli civilians, but what it also allows us basically to delay a potential additional escalation to a wider military confrontation with Hamas. And of course, we thank the US Congress and the US administration, of course, for their ongoing support to this very, very important project. So at least this is in a nutshell, the situation today in Israel.
Yeah, thank you very much. But to what degree can you assess, or are your superiors in Jerusalem assessing the effect of Israel's military campaign? Has this slowed down the rate of rocket firing into Israel? Do you see some results of the response of the Israel Defense Forces?
We do not see, if you're talking about the pace and the numbers of the rockets being launched at Israel, no, the answer is no, but our activities for the longer term. So the targets are the manufacturing facilities of rockets. The more they use, the less they will have in the longer term. We do not see that, and I have to say, they have the interest of, this is an asymmetric conflict between a sovereign state and that abides by the international law and the terrorist organization. What they want is to have this image among public opinion, their public opinion, that they managed to beat this sovereign state. So they have the interest of actually shooting more and with higher, let's say, fatalities on the Israeli side. One more thing that I have to say, it also has a regional context. We have other terrorist organizations in the region who are following very carefully this conflict. Hezbollah on the northern border of Israel with 150,000 much more advanced missiles and rockets, as well as Iran. They have the interest to learn about the capabilities of Iron Dome and its ability to intercept large barrages of rockets. So Hamas has the interest of now to actually push the conflict even stronger and to have a much more aggressive attack against Israel, and we're not going to allow them to do that.
All right, thank you. Of course, there are always critics, and there are critics who say that Israel's response is disproportionate, that Israel has the power has the military power to do what it is doing, and they must be Israel must be pressured to make concessions, etc. What's the response of the government of Israel to those accusations?
Again, we're fighting. This is a conflict that is asymmetric in nature. We are committed to international law and the law of the armed conflict, while the other side simply has no is not committed to such a situation. Actually, Hamas is actually involved in committing a double war crime, because they're not only targeting our civilians, but actually hiding behind their own civilians and putting their military facilities within their own civilian communities, and basically inviting the IDF to target these neighborhoods. We are, as I said, we do the targets are military targets, and we do whatever we can in order to avoid any harm to civilians in the Gaza Strip. We use different techniques, like one of them is it's called knocking on the roof, when you basically have a very tiny bomb that makes a lot of noise, and people know that they need to evacuate this building because there is a part of the building serves the military wing of Hamas. The IDF calls people to their phones and to their cell phones, urging them to leave the place if we know that there are people, innocent civilians in the surroundings of such a facility. We won't attack the facility, and we will wait for another opportunity. So, but again, the other side is actually hiding behind these civilians, using them as human shields, and this is a reality that we need to address. Again, we do whatever we can in order to avoid harming civilians in this conflict.
Yeah, thank you. An issue which has really complicated matters, and it is a complex issue, is the matter of Sheikh Jarrah. Rather than my attempting to contextualize it, I think that our viewers would appreciate your contextualizing it, that might have served as a catalyst for this round. But please inform us as to what the dispute is and what the role of the government of Israel is or is not.
Okay, so I will. Regarding Sheikh Jarrah, I should say that this is basically a legal issue. It was supposed to be discussed by the Supreme Court following deliberations in two previous courts in Jerusalem. It is a private legal dispute between private organizations and persons who claim to have the ownership over this property. And it was proceeded throughout these judicial stages. Both the local court in Jerusalem and the district court of Jerusalem rejected the claims by the Palestinian group of people who claimed that to have ownership over this property. It was rejected twice, and there was a court decision to evict those people. Again, it is not a government decision to evict the people, but actually a court decision to do that. And the courts in Israel are independent. Israel, the government is not part of this legal dispute. And as I said, the Supreme Court was supposed to discuss, was supposed to deliberate this dispute, this legal dispute, on Monday. And again, if I put things in context, the people who claim, the Palestinians who claim that they have the ownership, had the opportunity to appeal to the Supreme Court to have such a discussion on this issue. What happened is that part of our efforts to de-escalate the situation, you know what? I'll take a step back and I will put things in a context. Hamas has been using this period of sensitivity, of religious sensitivity during the holy month of Ramadan for Muslims, that coincides with, that leads all the way to their goal was to have to the peak of this conflict, the peak of the crisis, was supposed to be on Monday. So they actually, through incitement to violence, both related to, they turned Sheikh Jarrah into their political campaign, as well as the situation on the Temple Mount, inciting to violence and basically leading all the way to Monday. That was supposed to be Monday was Yom Yerushalayim, Jerusalem Day, and the day in which we celebrate in Israel the reunification of the city. Plus, coincidentally, there was supposed to be this discussion in the Supreme Court about Sheikh Jarrah. Plus, of course, the holy month of Ramadan with its very sensitive religious and political sentiment and emotional sentiment. So Hamas is basically taking advantage of the situation. As I said, Israel is not part. The government is not part of this legal dispute, and of course we reject their attempt, Hamas attempt to turn it into a national struggle, and of course not to accept the Hamas actually using it as an excuse to incite to violence. And again, as I said, part of our efforts to de-escalate the situation and to exercise restraint on Monday, one of the measures was by the Attorney General of the State of Israel to reach out to the court and actually ask to stay of the verdict and to postpone the discussion and the eviction. So the eviction will not go forward right now at this stage because of this security sensitivity. So we have actually taken some measures in order to delay and to postpone the eviction because of our understanding of the situation.
Thank you for that response. How is from your perspective of the Israeli government, how has the media been covering this dispute, this conflict, both the Sheikh Jarrah conflict as well as the greater escalation of violence? Generally speaking, the media misses the nuances. How accurate are they in reporting what's been going on during the course of this conflict?
So you're right. It's again, it's an asymmetric conflict between a sovereign state with a regular military force and the terrorist organization that controls the Gaza Strip. In many cases, people perceive Israel as a stronger part, and that's the reason that they think that our claims, our side is let's say that our campaign is illegitimate. Of course, we reject it, and I think that today, what we're seeing is you know, of course, people have their own views, and some people agree and some people disagree. But I think that what we're seeing is actually people understand that, one, there is no justification to shooting rockets at our civilians. Two, again, we are exercising the utmost restraint in the performance of our military campaign, trying to minimize as much as we can any harm to civilians. And I think that the more we do it, as long as we keep this balance, I think that people will actually be very supportive and understanding of the situation. I think that the images coming from Israel of civilians terrified and terrorized by Hamas rockets. I can tell you, I'm speaking with my family in Israel several times a day, and they are in shelters, and you know, we have young children living under this terror, and I think that the more we bring these images, I think that the more people understand that it's not a question of who is, let's say, the stronger part, but actually who is the right part and who has the right to defend its citizens, and who is also the side, in this case Israel, who is also protecting lives on the other side in the Gaza Strip.
Thank you. We're getting a number of questions in the chat as well. One of them is in regard to the United States and what role America has been playing and what role potentially our country could play in settling the current situation down.
First of all, the United States is Israel's first and most important ally, and we have special relations with the relationship with the United States that is shared on based on shared value. It is based on shared values. By the way, shared values is also or shared experiences of attacks against our civilians and resiliency. We have a very good dialogue and a very intimate dialogue, of course, with this current administration, like any administration before that, and we appreciate very much statements coming from DC, acknowledging and recognizing Israel's right to defend its citizens and its civilian communities, and we appreciate it, of course, very much. So the United States, of course, has the first role in our consideration at any given situation. Of course, part of the dialogue is done today mainly through DC, seeing what we can do and how we can actually not only end this conflict, but end this conflict in a way that would be also good for our people. Again, it's a battle against a terror organization, and that is designated also by the United States as a terror organization. But also, how can we guarantee that this very positive momentum in the region that started with the signing of the Abraham Accords and having more and more Arab countries joining this camp of peace is maintained?
Well, you opened up the door to the Abraham Accords. How are the Abraham Accords, Israel's relationship with several Arab countries, including the UAE, Morocco, Bahrain, how have those relationships been impacted by the current conflict?
Well, politically, you have of course expressions of concern. Diplomatically, you have expressions of concern by some of our Arab neighbors. Some of them are new friends. But I have to say that the base, the interests, at the essence, the basis of the Abraham Accords are there, and we perceive the accords as a base, as a first step to regional peace. So actually, it is an opportunity. So while certain countries may express concern about the situation, I think that they know very well at least the United Arab Emirates perceive this as a first step, and Bahrain, of course, perceives this as a first step to regional peace, and we share their call again to the Palestinian leadership, not Hamas, but to the Palestinian leadership in Ramallah, to join this camp and to promote, to start negotiate, to actually engage in negotiations on peace with Israel.
Oh, thanks. But one of, speaking of the Arab world, internal to the state of Israel, in cities such as Lod, we have seen rioting and destruction of property, and the firebombing of a synagogue. What is the Israeli government doing to try to quell those disturbances?
First of all, I would like to put things maybe in a certain context, or to talk about again. Israel is a democracy, and democracies are not perfect. There is no democracy that is perfect, and in many ways, tensions among communities is something that you have in other countries as well. But I have to say that I think that this is, in this case, we're talking about a very vocal and violent minority from both sides, who actually is looking to take advantage of these tensions in the region to heighten the situation. I think that the majority of the people share this view of shared future between Israelis and Arabs in Israel. Between Jews and Arabs in Israel. In many ways, this was a very special year, the year of 2020, the year of the pandemic, when people found themselves, spending time together in hospitals, And people realize that the person who actually saved their lives and to save the lives of their loved ones is not necessarily either. Sometimes Jews realize that the doctor who saved the lives of their loved ones is an Arab doctor or an Arab nurse, and vice versa. And in many ways, people, I think that I think that this year was an exceptional year in promoting and actually a coexistence between the different communities in Israel, because we share this threat of this outside, this external challenge to not only to the communities, but actually to our health and our lives. I have to say, maybe I'll add one more thing. You know, in the last 5 years, the government decided to promote a process of I won't call it inclusion, but actually an attempt to minimize the gaps between the different communities in Israel. It has invested several billions of shekels in improving infrastructure in the Arab communities, improving and strengthening and empowering certain groups within the Arab community. For example, students. So you have dozens of the statistics shows that in the last 5 years you have dozens of percentages more Arab students, especially women Arab women students in universities in Israel, thanks to these special programs that actually allow them to bridge to minimize these gaps and to empower to strengthen their communities. We have also expressions of, for example, one issue that is, I know that this is also relevant to the United States, the issue of access to broadband internet during the pandemic. So the government actually encouraged and supported the deployment of, actually reached out to cellular companies in order to deploy their antennas in the more remote areas in which you have Arab communities, and that allow them to have the access to the broadband internet, and hence by this to be able to learn remotely for the children, and have access to online courses for people who lost their jobs. But it's not only the government, because in Tel Aviv, for example, you had campaigns by certain nonprofits to collect unused laptops and send it to these communities in order to support them in need. So, you know, we may see the images coming from Israel today. I think that the quiet majority who supports this coexistence is much stronger than any development on the ground that you can see right now.
Well, thank you for that response. That's something which I know is of concern to many people. Do you actually it kind of slips into the whole issue of COVID, and how Israel has achieved such significant success in vaccinating a majority of its population. But of course, there are the critics who are saying, well, the Palestinians are not receiving their vaccinations, that Israel's not providing the vaccines. Can you address that issue too? Is that another issue of tension between Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs and Israelis and Palestinians?
First of all, we should differentiate between the Arab Israeli community and the Palestinians. The Arab community in Israel enjoys equal rights and equal treatment by the government. So I think that we have about 90% of the population, if not more than that, today vaccinated. Without any discrimination of race, gender, or religion. So the Arab community in Israel enjoyed access to the vaccine just like any other community in Israel. The question of the vaccinating the Palestinians is a different question. It is also related to our legal obligations. It is related to the responsibility of the Palestinian Authority. What I should say is this. First of all, the government said that the first priority for vaccination is the Israeli civilians and Israeli citizens. So this is the top priority right now. Secondly, Israel has vaccinated I think that we're talking about 120,000 Palestinians. Most of them are workers, people who work inside Israel. We also gave another 5,000 shipment of 5,000 vaccines as a humanitarian measure. We gave it to the Palestinian leadership. I have to say that they mistreated this shipment of 5,000 vaccines. It was given to the people who are related and close to the Palestinian Authority leadership in a very corrupt manner. But I want to also to say something about the responsibility. At the end of the day, while we attach great importance because they are our neighbors and their health affect our health. The health of the Palestinians is important to Israel, but there's also a question of a responsibility. Now, according to the Abraham Accords, I would like to remind everyone here that the vast majority of the Palestinian population actually live under full control of the Palestinian Authority. So, according to the Abraham Accords, it is their responsibility to take care of the healthcare of their communities.
I think it's the Oslo Accords.
According to the Oslo Accords,
right.
And according to the Oslo Accords, and
you had mentioned the Abraham Accords. It's the Oslo Accords.
I'm sorry. So, of course, the Oslo Accords, and Israel will, of course, facilitate quickly and without any delay any shipment that is ordered by the Palestinian Authority to vaccinate. And actually Israel has done it already. The Palestinian Authority is actually working with the different pharma companies as well as with the UN and the World Health Organization in order to receive shipments of vaccines for the well-being and the healthcare of and the health of their own population. And of course, again, Israel will not delay, and Israel will facilitate the entrance of such shipments immediately in order not to delay the vaccination of the Palestinian population in the West Bank.
All right, thanks for that. I'm going to go back to the conflict with Hamas in Gaza. One of our viewers asked the question about what Israel has done regarding to dropping leaflets in Arabic throughout the Gaza, stating that Hamas is using civilians as human shields and that many of their rockets are falling in Gaza and killing their own civilians. I know that there's leaflet dropping. What is on those leaflets?
Well, we use leaflets, but we also use, by the way, today you can use social media because everybody is on social media. Only yesterday, I think, that Defense Minister Benny Gantz conveyed a message in Arabic for Eid al-Fitr to the population in Gaza, basically telling them that the campaign is not aimed against them, and the campaign is aimed against Hamas, a terrorist organization that is also their enemy, that controls the Gaza Strip for 15 years and invests in their military buildup instead of investing in vaccines to the population in Gaza, instead of investing in the water infrastructure in the Gaza Strip. And the enemy is Hamas at the end of the day. So today we use not only the leaflets, but actually also social media, some telephone calls. People receive telephone calls with messages. And again, the Palestinian people, the civilians, the innocent civilians are not our enemy. At the end of the day, the enemy are the terrorists who target our cities, and they are the target in this campaign.
Thanks. Israeli elections. Can you talk to us through this complicated time frame with everything that is going on in Israel and around Israel? Can you just give us an update on what the status of the Israeli body politic is, and when the next decision needs to be made by to determine whether there will be another election, will not be another election, and is this government, the current government, the Netanyahu government, stable enough to continue to lead this country. It's not a questioning it. I'm just asking more generally, considering all of the matters that are currently that they're facing with the rockets and the riots and the vaccines, et cetera, et cetera.
So maybe I will open with your last with the latter, the last question. I think that at the end of the day, Israel is a very strong democracy with strong institutions, and even though we are in a certain political crisis with the lack of ability to form a coalition, and we're after a fourth round of elections, I think that the institutions, the state institutions, the government, the parliament, the Knesset, as well as the courts, as well as other state and government agencies are strong and are stable. And I think that the performance in the implementation of the vaccine right in drive in Israel only proves that we can, the state can perform such a complicated and complex project related to the related also to the situation in Gaza. I think that there is no effect. And by the way, this is a consensual issue. It's not a political issue in Israel. The consensus is that the civilians cannot be Israeli civilians cannot be targeted by terrorists. Related to the regarding to the political process, I'm not on a very stable ground here, but I will try to describe it. Netanyahu, basically after the elections, there is the parties who managed to have seats, win seats in the Knesset, go to the president to recommend who is the head of the party who can actually has the highest chances to form a coalition of 61. It's a very tricky and very delicate political game. Netanyahu actually received the first chance to form a coalition of 61. He eventually, by not managing to conclude this work, he had to give the mandate back to the president, and President Rivlin gave the mandate to the person who has the second best chances, according to the recommendations, which is Yair Lapid. There are, let's say, very sensitive political discussions among different parties today. I think that there is a very strong push by the or expectation by the people in Israel not to go to a fifth round of elections. The discussions are right in the process. Maybe I should say that going back to the question of this intercommunal tension, or the way that it is perceived as intercommunal tension in Israel between Jews and Arabs, today one of the kingmakers is actually a head of an Arab party, Mansour Abbas. That is, at least politically, he is perceived as one of the kingmakers who can actually decide who is going to be the next prime minister and if we're going to have a government. So this is the situation right now. We are right in the middle of these discussions among the parties on forming a coalition. Things are very complicated and very delicate politically, so I would not like to step on a political landmine. So I will stop here, and so this is the situation at the moment.
Thanks. And speaking of complicated situations, the two-state solution, two states for two peoples, are the prospects of that being brought to fruition greater, or are they set back because of what's happening now in the country?
I think that, again, I would like to start with the Abraham Accords. Because again, the Abraham Accords are a first step in a way that should lead us to a regional peace process. And the view and the perception behind the Abraham Accords is actually, this is the first time that neighboring countries actually put the interests of the people, the interests of their own people at the forefront and as a top priority. And actually, it's the people who actually encourage us to build this relationship. Now, again, this is not limited to Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain. It is a regional process, and we call on our Palestinian neighbors to join this process and to re-engage in negotiations with Israel. I should say that this current situation only emphasizes, this current situation today with the conflict with Hamas only emphasizes the problem that, of the complexities, because the Palestinian Authority does not control the Gaza Strip. It is Hamas, it is a terrorist organization who is in control of the Gaza Strip. So you mentioned the solution of the two states to two peoples, and Hamas and the Fatah, the Palestinian Authority and Hamas do not have any common ground at all whatsoever. They do not speak with each other and are in deep enmity. So should we talk about the three states for two peoples solution? I think that the first priority is to address the problem of Hamas in the West Bank, of Hamas's control in the Gaza Strip, that is not only a security threat to the people and civilians in Israel. It's also complicated much more the political situation and the diplomatic situation. They have no authority to control the Gaza Strip, according to the Oslo Accords and the interim agreement. It is the responsibility of the Palestinian Authority to control the Gaza Strip together in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And we need to address this problem. I would like maybe to say one more thing about the situation. The problem of incitement to terrorism is a problem that we need to discuss. We need to find a solution to the problem of incitement, because what we're seeing today is the outcome of incitement to terrorism. And it should be part of our diplomatic engagement and actually a pressure on the Palestinian Authority and any Palestinian leadership to fight against and to stop inciting to violence, because this creates a very negative situation on the ground and could lead to violence as we saw today. So while we call on our Palestinian neighbors to join this regional process that we have launched with our friends from the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, we also need to address the problems on the ground are the results of the Palestinian behavior.
Well, thank you, and I'm very sensitive to your time and appreciate that you spent so much of your time with us and being so open and direct in responding to my questions and some of the questions we're able to get to in the chat. So Consul General, would there be any last word you'd like to leave with us before we part?
I would like to say thank you. I would like to say first of all, to thank you, Michael, for inviting me, and to thank the JCRC for all the wonderful work that you're doing here in the city and representing the Jewish community. I want to thank the Jewish community, and I want to thank our elected officials for the very strong messages of support and solidarity with Israel these days that we appreciate very, very much, and it is very important for us here at the Consul and also in Jerusalem. So I should thank you for everything that you're doing.
Well, we thank you more than you should really be thanking us for the role that you are playing here, representing the state of Israel in New York. And for our viewers, please know that the Consul General's territory, his catchment area, travels all the way to Ohio through various states to get there as well. And so he has a tremendous responsibility, and spending all this time with us is very meaningful to us. I also want to thank my production team, Noam Gilboard and Rebecca Grossman, for their behind the scenes role with Community Relations Corner and this interview. So on behalf of all of us, I want to once again offer our gratitude to Acting Consul General Israel Nitzan for joining us on Community Relations Corner. and for describing for us the realities of what's happening on the ground up to date. And I also want to wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom and a Chag Sameach with Shavuot coming around the corner. I'm scheduled to fly to Israel tonight, and it's a bit challenging right now considering that Ben Gurion Airport is closed and flights are being diverted. But I hope that if I do get there, I'll convey everybody's warm, including the Consul General's warm bruchim le shalom to everybody whom I meet, including my family. And I wish everybody well, and hopefully, God willing, the violence directed against Israel will end. Take care, everybody. Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach. Look forward to seeing you again. Thank
Shabbat
you.
Shalom, Chag Sameach.
Bye-bye.